I started editing, and how I got into editing was back in 1972. I always wanted to paint, draw, and what have you. That was my background. That's what I loved to do. I struggled with that whole art process because unless I was prepared to go out and live as a hippie in the bush and paint, I wasn't going to have a career. And I didn't see it like that. I was always a little bit more commercially minded, and I wanted to do something that could be part of a career. And it was through Crawford Productions that I sort of found myself in filmmaking. One of the great things about Crawford's, they had this sort of traineeship thing where you had sort of like an apprenticeship arrangement, but it was, you just did like work experience type thing. But you got involved in every process of the filmmaking at Crawford Productions back then. You were exposed to everything. Moment came when we were then put into the editing department, and so we were put into a room. The fact that it was all done, that was fantastic. I thought, I don't have to wait for the lighting anymore. We don't have to wait for this. It was all finished. It was in film strips. I mean, it was 16mm film, but you could see it all finished. It was on moviolas, and so you could actually see it. And that moment was, what happens from there is that you then put the whole story together. I thought that was brilliant. Of all the departments that we were sort of attached to, that was the best by far. And I fell in love with that at that moment. And I think my career path just kept going down that path. I loved the sound department, I loved the editing department, I loved the whole, anything that had to do with that process of advancing the story without the technical issues of sitting back and waiting for the sun to come out or the sun to go in or any of those sort of things. Yeah, that was the editing. For me, that was that defining moment. Walking into the editing room, seeing it shot and seeing the roles sitting there, and all you had to do then was just piece the story together. Like they were all a piece of the jigsaw puzzle, and now it's you going to be putting that together. And I thought that was heaven. Still do. Yeah. Television commercials are a very different discipline. It's a bit like sprinters. They're a bit like sprinters, 100 metres as opposed to 5,000 metres mile races. Different kind of, in a funny sort of way, very different animal. But the principles still are the same. We're still running. One of the things we did as an exercise was we did a little bit of an exercise of taking a film and cut it down, see if you can make the film in 10 minutes. It's a fantastic thing for a commercial editor to play with. Anybody that wants to be a commercial editor, it's a fantastic exercise. Make it into 5 minutes. We did that. Took films, classic films, and just cut it, make it into 5 minutes, and see how you go with it. And you can do it. It's fun. Heck of a lot of fun. To see that the story is still there and show somebody and they go, wow, yeah, the story is still there. And I think that's what we're dealing with in advertising, is the disciplines that are involved in really trying to make that story or idea still come through. But you're never going to, I mean, it's really difficult to get that sort of hard-fought emotion. It takes minutes to establish that sort of thing. To actually sit there and start paring the thing down without hurting it is really difficult. And it gets very frustrating at times. Sometimes you're sitting at 32 seconds and going, I don't want to take anything more out. Anything now is going to hurt it. And, you know, I think, look, comedy commercials work extremely well because you've got little sketches and they can work extremely well. And people like Paul Middleditch, that's absolute master at it, absolute master at it. And he just knows how to deal with that timing. So most of the time when it comes to me, we get through things fairly quickly. It's a bit of shorthand stuff, and I know where Paul's coming from, and we work very, very fast. And he's quite prolific, so we get through a fair amount of work fairly quickly. So with Big Ad here, we've got a client, Carlton United, that were keen to do something different and unusual. So that's the first stage. Then you've got some terrific creatives, Grant Rutherford and Ant Keogh and James McGrath, the creative, putting an idea together that the client would love. Then giving it to somebody like Paul Middleditch, who could execute it with, I think, with like the perfect humour. You could give it to another director who could make it a big ad and put it on a big scale, grand scale. But to ensure it with that sort of ridiculousness, that's where Paul's brilliant. And as a team, I think they worked it superbly. You know, even down to the fence that would hold them up. And you know, Paul's brother is in it, and he's climbing over the fence, and everybody, you just go, what the heck's that in there for? So it's all part of that same irreverent kind of attitude towards it. So in that respect, it was terrific. And I guess I got involved in it earlier than I normally do on commercial side of things, because it was being choreographed, and there was a lot of post-production work in it. So really, they had to make sure that they were getting it right before they shot. There was not really a lot of experimentation going into it. At the end of the day, it really had to work this way, because there was a lot of mapping that needed to be done by Animal Logic and things like that. So they really had to get it right. Paul had done the storyboard. He does his own storyboards. He worked with the creatives at the agencies to come up with the ideal storyboard. Had the track already done. And so my involvement I got involved when we put the storyboard out as an animatic. Cut up the board, put it out as an animatic. Put Kamina Barana on the track and started to time out the shots. And then they mapped out a lot of the material when they shot it, like helicopters. So they shot a fair amount, and then when it came back, we just started to sort of piece it together with the storyboard to see how that worked. And then we just started to move it around a little bit more. It all had to be locked in with the track. So it was pretty tight, the way we just kind of went through it. The trick was we were going to obviously try and leave enough room for the gag. And I guess when we're editing, we were making sure that we didn't overcomplicate it. I mean, one of the things that we were very mindful of, you just didn't want to have a heck of a lot of these close-ups that, you know, wipe through frames and things that could have been in there if you were making a big gladiator-style picture. And strictly speaking, like Lord of the Rings, there's a lot of close-ups of whipping past camera and textural stuff. Well, we really avoided a lot of that. Tried to keep it very simple, because if you overcomplicate something like that, you will lose the humour and that intrinsic humour that was coming out of this opera. And so we would send stuff off to Animal Logic fairly early in the edit, and they would do temps for us so that we could bring them back and put them in and try that out. And then, oh, that's too quick or whatever. So you're finding, when you're looking at a still shot, you're thinking, yeah, a second and a half, that might be enough. And when you're looking at a second and a half of a still, it's a long time. You put a mass of people up there and the crane's moving up, suddenly it just goes into, you know, that, it's like, oh, too quick. So you'd start to build them out a bit, and then suddenly it just throws the rest of it out because you've only allowed for that. So there is that process of just going backwards and forwards through the editing on that. And it wasn't so much the amount of footage. It was more the rhythm and pacing of it that was important. But as I say, you know, a lot of that Paul really had it nailed, and from my perspective, it came together pretty well and pretty quickly. You know, there wasn't a lot of labouring over it. Once we kind of had it there was only a couple of areas that just needed to be tweaked, and as everything is, kind of run out of space again. You know, you just go, oh, it's just that little bit tight, and you want a little bit more on there, but in the end, that's what you feel at the time, but the punter doesn't see that. You know? And it comes out and everybody goes, hey, that's amazing. There's only one thing. Editors lost their mystique the moment we lost our Steenbecks. The moment we worked onto a computer, it all went pear-shaped. And we've been struggling ever since to get it back again. When editing system changed from film to a computer, the aid to the editor was massive. It was fantastic. Editors loved it. But we lost every single area of authority that we had, simply because nobody understood how to cut film. Nobody could run a moviola or a Steenbeck. That was the craft of being able to make. So you were a film editor. The moment it moved on to a computer, oh, I can use a computer. So a lot of people, So I think it was very difficult from that point on. So once upon a time, editors had the ability to do something that nobody could do. Today, there are many, many young people that can do what I do so much faster and with such panache. It is very difficult at times to actually go, well, why are you, I mean, to judge an editor on the speed at which they can put things together is a nonsense. But I think that's happening. But editors are being asked to do a lot more today than just tell a story. They're being asked to do visual effects side of things and full mixes, and that can be fun, but heavens above, it's a mammoth job. When really what they should be concentrating on is making the story work, the rhythm work, the performances work. And if the performances are a bit sloppy, a bit wooden, inexperience from actors or directors, then the job of the editor really is to disguise that and make it work so that the story is still told and it doesn't have any of that sort of awkwardness about it. And good editors can do that. It's not a technology, it's a craft. And we're using the technology to continue that craft. And I don't think that we abuse that craft at times by smoke and mirrors with technology. But you know, that will come through.
It's a big ad, very big ad. It's a big ad we're in. It's a big ad. My God, it's big. Can't believe how big.